Okay, we've got some folks that are joining us now. Well, let me first say, while we get people climbing on the line here, my name is Andy Davis. I am the director, senior director of education and outreach at BoardSource, and we are extremely excited to be able to host this live stream, Facebook live stream today. And I will introduce our guests here in just a moment. First, let me just say, as we get into these conversations, um, we can't answer every question. We're going to answer as many as we possibly can. We want to be in this fight with you here at BoardSource, and so that's the reason we're hosting this live stream today. But if you have super specific questions about your organization that you feel might not have got touched on today, feel free to email our Ask the Expert service at BoardSource. My team and I will take your question, and we will do the very best we can at getting you the answers that you need. This situation is going to touch all of our organizations differently, and we've got some great expertise here to talk about really the board's role in this time and how a CEO and board chair can partner together to get the most out of the board and be great partners with each other. So with that being said, my first guest, I think if I'm doing this correctly, on the bottom center of your screen is Ann Walstead. Ann Walstead is the CEO and president of BoardSource. And the top left is Kathy Trower. And Kathy Trower is the board chair at BoardSource. She is also the author of the Practitioner's Guide to Governance as Leadership, as well as the second edition of Govern More, Manage Less. So thank you all again for joining us. Feel free to type a question into that side comment area there. I will get to those as we can. We have about 70 folks who are on live now with us, 65. And so keep putting those questions up. If we don't get to them, like I said, feel free to email our Ask the Expert service. So here we go. Let's just hop in here and we'll take the questions that I've been seeing through our Ask the Expert service. The ones that are showing up more and more feel like we're getting a lot of energy around some similar questions. So we're going to tackle those first. And the first is, in our current environment, as it's shifting so quickly for CEOs and board chairs who are simply trying to stay on top of a very fast moving situations, are there any places that the two of you would recommend that CEOs should make sure to address first? And then where should they be looking to the board or board chair for support? And Ann, I'm going to let you tackle this one first.
Sure. Thanks, Andy. And thanks to all of you for being with us. As Andy said, we're going to do our very best to provide some helpful guidance for boards and staff, leaders working together in this moment. But we know that you're facing tough questions, and we want to be able to be as supportive as we possibly can. So to your specific question, Andy, I think first and foremost, and I would guess that most leaders and organizations have already done this, but we really need to understand and assess the risk for the health and safety of our staff and the people that we serve, and make temporary adjustments to mitigate that risk. So for some organizations, that can be pretty straightforward. For example, for us at BoardSource, we're set up to work remotely. That was an easy transition for us to make, and we're able to continue, with very little interruption. But we understand that that's not the case for many organizations who are facing much more complex decisions about what closing the doors actually means. For some, that actually eliminates your ability to operate, or it might even create other risks as you're providing essential resources and services to your community. So, the general advice that I would offer there is to really rely on the advice and guidance of health professionals and local government who understand the specific situation in your community and give you the opportunity to, make the best decisions for your organization and the people you serve and your staff based on real data that's relevant to your specific situation and location. Second, and I would guess this is where most organizations are spending a lot of time in this moment, is to really work to understand the impact on your organization longer term, and understanding what decisions you may need to be making today to ensure that you're able to continue or resume your organization's work once the public health crisis is over. This is a work that's largely led by the chief executive or the executive director, but the board needs to be brought in to really partner around asking questions, understanding assumptions, and advising and endorsing major plans and decisions. So just very generally, I think that starts with understanding the potential impact on your organization's revenue. And I would say, don't assume that it won't have an impact, but also don't assume that there's nothing that you can do to make a difference. This is a moment where it really matters to engage directly with donors and funders about ways that they can support you through this public health crisis. And I would say that includes sharing with them what it would mean for them to help you, for your organization and the people and communities that you serve, and also what it would mean if you don't have the support that you need to get through this public health crisis. Second, it means thinking through what that means in terms of your revenue to expense ratios. So can you afford to continue to operate in the same way? For how long? Are there things that you could do to reduce organizational costs? What are they? And what would the long-term impact on your organization be if you pursued them? And then that gets to the really hard part of evaluating options and plans. And I know from the questions that we're receiving from so many of you across the country that you're facing really, really tough decisions. And my heart goes out to all of you who are in that situation. And I know it's a lot of you. This could mean, unfortunately, for organizations making really tough decisions about staffing and programs. And I know that's incredibly difficult. And, just generally in terms of guidance or advice or support, I think it's really important to ensure that between the chief executive or ED and the board, that there's clarity about what the plan is. There's clarity about what has been prioritized and why. And I think all three of those things are really essential, both so that the organization can make the best decisions, but also so that the board can provide support, confidence, and backup as the CEO or ED is executing on those plans. So those would be some general pieces of guidance that I would offer in terms of what do we need to be thinking about first. But Kathy, I'd love for you to weigh in on anything that you'd add or that you see differently.
Thanks, Anne, and thanks everyone for joining us, and Andy for this opportunity. I very much agree and just would echo clarity on the plan, priorities, and why, I think, in those assumptions. And so to push back a little bit and have that conversation. I know when I get a call from Anne, other CEOs that I work with, and particularly thinking about my role as board chair, I want to know what she needs. I mean, that's my first priority, is to find out, Anne, what do you need? I listen carefully, and I try to resist that temptation to jump in with an automatic, off-the-cuff kind of, well, I've seen this before response. I just listen. I want to know her thinking. And in these moments, I think her thinking as CEO is more important than my thinking, at least in the first instances. And as she listed out, those are the kinds of things I'm listening for and listening carefully. I want to know that she's got a handle on the situation internally, as Anne mentioned, thinking of our internal stakeholders and thinking of our internal resources, including finances. And I want to know about contingency plans. I want to know about risk mitigation, but this situation is so fluid. Those things might be changing even as we speak right now in the midst of this what that we're doing right now. I had a CEO I was talking to this morning put it this way. She had heard this somewhere else. She said it's a bit like walking in a whiteout. And I don't know, for those of you who ski or are familiar with when it's snowing so hard you can't see anything. And the idea is you take a step and then you see where you are and you kind of figure things out, and then you take another step. So I am looking for, obviously, as a board chair, that plan, understanding that some things are going to be more critical right now, and we are kind of feeling our way together. My job in the moment is to listen, is to provide counsel when asked, and ensure that the full board is informed. So one of the things as board chair, I think it's really important when you have that conversation with your CEO in these moments is to say, how would you like me to inform the rest of the board? And be very clear about what you're going to do in terms of keeping the board informed. The CEO needs to know, as Anne just articulated, that the board has her back, and I think it's really important. And I, as a board chair, let Anne know that I'm here 24/7. She doesn't call me in the middle of the night or text me, but if she needs to, I'm here for her and Board Source 24/7. And she has enough on her plate. So I think it's the board chair's job to keep the board apprised and under control and not into micromanagement. We'll probably talk a little bit more about that as we go forward. Thanks.
Well, actually, yeah, I think Kathy, that's a great segue into, you know, the first thing you said is you want to resist your instinct to jump in and help. You want to listen to what Ann needs. You want to be a partner with her. How do we do that with board members? Because when board members join a board, it's normally because they have a passion for the mission or they love the organization and so they want to help. All board members, they are volunteers and they want to help and they want to be instrumental in this time. How do we kind of resist the urge for board members, or how do we get them to kind of not micromanage in this place? They want to have an impact, but how can we get them to make the right impact?
Yes, and it's a great question. Another one that I just experienced this morning with another board. There, what I've done, and I would encourage other board chairs to do, is ask your CEO, what do you need from the board right now? Is there anything that you need from the board? Because you might be between board meetings, there's not a board meeting coming up. And so what do we need from the board? And what would be helpful to you? And then have her articulate that. And then write an email to the board and say, I know that you want to help. Here's 3 ways you can right now. And just articulate that. And then also express, we understand, you may have come up with other ideas of how you think you can help. Run them by me. Let's talk about them. Because that could actually be something that could be expanded to others as well. So those are some of my first instincts on that one.
Yeah, and I would just jump in and add one. I totally agree with everything that you're saying, Kathy, and I so appreciate the role that you're playing with Board Sources Board in this moment. A few things that I would add or echo in particular that I think especially apply to the chair, but also apply to each individual board member. First, don't panic. Work really, really hard to bring calm to your deliberations and discussions with the chief executive as much as you can. They need that from you, and that's one of the roles of the board, is to be even in a way that as chief executives, it's sometimes much more challenging to do because we're in the thick of it. Second, and you heard this from Kathy, ask questions and really try to avoid being directive. So curiosity, yes. Direction, no. Now's the time to really back up the chief executive and support their leadership, not to question everything and slow things down. That doesn't mean you don't ask questions, but interrogating decision-making in a crisis moment is a lot different than when you're sitting back and doing strategic planning. Listen and offer help. I think Kathy covered that well. Make sure that you're asking the chief executive where the board can be helpful and then focusing there. And then finally, just being supportive. These are really tough times for all of us as people and humans, but it's a tough time to be an organizational leader. So don't forget to ask your ED or CEO how they're doing. That's a way that the board can really be helpful.
Awesome, thanks. And I think we had a couple of folks say that they were having a little bit of difficulty hearing us. I think we've got that worked out, but Ann and Kathy, if I could just kind of remind you to make sure that you're speaking up and kind of into your microphone there, just so everybody can enjoy the thoughtful insights here. So kind of building off of this ways that the board can be a great partner, I would think most, if not every nonprofit in the country has had to change their operating norms already. And so when CEOs are developing contingency plans for the organization and going through these times of crisis where things are moving incredibly fast, Kathy, how can the board be a partner to the CEO in developing new plans and creating new systems for the organization without there being too much communication and traffic to slow processes down?
Right. That's a great question. And I think for me, I think about at this time, the board's job is really to ensure that the CEO has contingency plans and is thinking about one way we like to put it is what's the worst case scenario, what's the most likely scenario and best case, but really thinking about what to do if worst case happens, and or best case case or most likely case. As we all know, there's no crystal ball, so even sometimes trying to figure out what that would look like is challenging. Things are unfolding on a world stage without precedence, with many unknowables. So I think it really is just that dialogue. I really like, what Ann said about curiosity is great, being directed, being directive is not. And I think this is one of the places I have seen some board chairs kind of stumble, because a lot of board chairs got to be board chair because they're very successful in other walks of life. And they may have a lot of experience in those other walks of life. They may be a CEO somewhere else. They may be a CFO. They might be some other C-suite executive or a business owner or something like that. And so the instinct is to, I think, oftentimes come up with a right answer. So resisting the urge to have a right answer, but really talking through contingency planning instead of forcing your will. That is because you think you've got the answer. There isn't going to be, I don't think there's going to be a lot of right answers here. We're figuring this out together. So those are just some initial thoughts on that, Andy.
Thanks.
Yeah, and I would just jump in. A really natural, understandable, but extremely unhelpful question for boards, whether board chairs or individual board members, to be asking themselves at this moment is, how would I handle this? That's not where the board needs to be focused. So, thinking about the oversight role of the board specifically, agree with everything that Kathy has said, is, the board really needs to be confident that the CEO is making the decisions that are following the law and putting the organization's mission and purpose first. So, sort of focusing on kind of that as the oversight frame, and then thinking about the places where maybe the board doesn't have enough information to have that confidence, and how to ask questions about those things. So probing questions like, how are you thinking about this? Or what are our plans for that? Can be a good way to gain understanding and confidence without interfering or micromanaging.
Thank you. And that was kind of going to be my follow-up question. As a CEO, what kind of information are you looking for? But I think you've kind of gotten there, but when you reach out to the board, what is the most helpful information to get back from them? And how do you kind of filter that advice?
Yeah, I guess I'd zoom out from that a little bit and think more broadly about how the board can be most helpful in a moment of crisis, and what, as CEOs, we need to do to help the board be as helpful as possible, because we obviously play a big role in how the board shows up, and how they're able to engage, because we just have a better understanding of what's happening within our organizations, with our staff teams, with the community that we serve. So I would say first and foremost, as CEOs, it's important that we provide clarity about what we know and what we don't, so that the board understands the situation as we see it at a high level. I would say second, we need to be asking the board what we need and providing clarity about how they can help, both individually and as a collective. So if we need the board to make a decision on something or to approve something, we need to say that, and we need to tee up why it's important, how we thought about it, why we think it's why it's the right decision, or why it's the recommendation that we're making, and bring them into our thinking on that. And if there are individual things that we need from them, whether from a fundraising perspective or an outreach perspective or a crisis communication perspective, we need to make specific asks of individual board members who can help us. And I would say, picking up on that, we have the opportunity to use individual board members and the board as a whole as a thought partner. So, hopefully you're in a situation where you've worked really hard to build a board that includes a wide range of important expertise that's relevant to your organization and its work. Use it. Now is the time. So whether that's legal expertise, HR expertise, business planning expertise, crisis communication, which I mentioned, anything that might be helpful in this moment, use your board and individual board members as a kitchen cabinet that allows you to have fast counsel that is, already ramped up in terms of understanding the organization and very motivated and inclined to help in a crisis moment. And then the final thing that I would say is, lean on them for support. if you've done all of those other things well, then they're in a moment of feeling really, confident about your leadership. It's okay to say this is hard, and it's okay to say I could use a little boost today.
Yeah, thanks. And that's just such a great reminder that that this is difficult, and having somebody to support you is incredibly helpful. And we changed that language. I think in the second edition of the 10 basic responsibilities to include supporting the CEO. And folks have, I think it really changed the way people saw their role as a CEO, not just hiring, firing, but supporting the CEO. I do want to just comment and just say, I know that Kathy and Ann can't see these comments that are coming in on the right-hand side. It is awesome to look over there and just see all of these folks that know each other, that are reconnecting, that are just everybody that's just stepping in and saying hello to folks, friends that I have from all over the country. Be able to see just even you comment is just, it's really nice. And so welcome to my bedroom, and welcome to Kathy and Ann's homes. And don't forget, you can use that box to ask questions. And I guess I'll go ahead and get to our next question, but I definitely see one from Akia Moody that I want to ask here in just a second. But let's go to this one. And Ann, I know you have a background, your background is in fundraising before you became COO and then CEO of BoardSource. So I'll pitch this to you first, and then Kathy, if you have thoughts, we'd love to hear them. But every organization has a different mission or scope, and obviously is experiencing this very differently right now. But for organizations that do fundraise, what should the board's role be right now? How can the board step up in this time?
Yeah, I think a lot of organizations and boards are asking themselves that question, in large part because of what they're anticipating in terms of revenue impact. And the perhaps unhelpful answer is, I don't think it's all that different from what it was 3 months ago in terms of how boards can be most helpful. But it's sort of if not now, when? Your organization needs you to really be engaged and do absolutely everything that you can to bring funds in to enable your organization to do its important work now, during public health crisis and post public health crisis. So thinking about how you are best positioned to help, where your network might be open to learning about your organization in this moment, thinking about how you talk to a new potential donor about the importance of your organization's work in this context. That's what board members can and should be doing in this moment, and really thinking about anything and everything that they can do to appropriately accelerate revenue generation for your organization.
Thanks. Kathy, do you have any thoughts, or you think Ann summed it up nicely here?
She did. I just had one other additional thought. I think that was spot on. I think that board members in this moment should really push themselves as individuals to think about, are they leaning in enough to this? Because it's easy in good times to say, well, somebody else is covering that, So I think we need to push ourselves as individuals to think about how we can best advocate still more, who else we could reach out that we haven't thought about reaching out to before. And going beyond your usual circles. I mean, this is a time where communities are coming together in all sorts of ways. And so I think we just need to push ourselves to be more innovative and get outside of our comfort zone even more than we have in the past. And I think together, and as we come up with different ways to do that, to share with others, it's like, wow, I just thought of something I hadn't thought of before that I could do to advocate on behalf of my organization, or to make a connection that might be really helpful in this moment. So some other thoughts I had.
Awesome. So I'm going to take a couple of questions from folks who are on the line here. And like I said, Makia Moody has a great question. She's a great friend of BoardSource from La Piana Consulting. And her question was, do you think that once we are all beyond this crisis, that organizations will be more inclined towards strategic partnerships as a course of survival? And just before I turn that over to you, Ann, I do want to note that Daryl is on the line, and he is from the Alliance of Michigan YMCAs, and he had already noted in the comments above that one of their discoveries is that partnerships and collaborations that had already been established are really paying off significantly right now, and they're leveraging those in the crisis, but it's really hard to initiate new ones during a crisis. So love to hear what your thoughts were from both of you, but we'll start with Ann.
Yeah, I think that's really wise. So thanks, Daryl, and thanks, Makia, for the question. I think it's a tough time when you're in crisis to think about how partnership might help your organization. You know, generally we've done a lot of work around strategic alliances and restructuring in partnership with Lopiana and others through the power of possibility. And when you have the opportunity to approach those partnerships from a strategic frame rather than a crisis-oriented frame, we know that they do better. That's not to say that it's impossible. And I do think, at least I'm hopeful, that one of the things that we take from this situation as a sector and as individual nonprofit organizations and leaders is that we are only as strong as the ecosystem in which we operate. And when we can work together and think creatively about ways that we can do more together, we are better served. And so I'm hopeful that one of the silver linings that may happen is that we do think more creatively and innovatively about ways to work together in sustained, deep ways. And I'm encouraged to hear that those who have really invested in that way are seeing the benefit of that, and we certainly are experiencing that at BoardSource as well. You know, and leaning hard on the partnerships that we've built over many years to make sure that we're not trying to do what we do alone in this moment.
Awesome.
I would just add, and thanks for that question, Makia, would add that, and this is something that BoardSource does, we've been doing as a board, as an organization, is talking about impact. And talking about impact, as Ann said, in an ecosystem. We don't stand alone, we stand together. And I think, you know, it's not about competition, it's about impact. And the more poised the board is and comfortable the board is having those conversations, the better off we're going to be. And I do think that we will see more strategic partnerships, more collaboration. And the more that we can get out, as you said, you can't do it in this moment. This is not the time for those. But when we come through this, we start to spotlight the organizations like Daryl's that have, look, we were already there and it's really helping us, and tell those stories. I think that's going to really help spawn strategic partnerships and alliances. And I think that will help lift the sector. And that's what we're all about.
Really great question here from Susan. I want to get to this because this is not one that we were going to bring up, but I think it's an essential one for board members, especially as we ask them to be advocates and ambassadors for our organization. But what are we doing to ensure that board members have the most effective talking points for your organization?
Kathy, do you want to field that, or do you want me to take it first?
I'll start, and then I'm sure you can add to it. This is the, you know, we talk at BoardSource about the elevator speech. What are those talking points? And I think it's absolutely essential that every board member have a set of points that they can make that really resonate with them, and then make them their own. So BoardSource does this. BoardSource lets us know of things that we can use as board members as we talk, and then we can kind of shape them to fit with our network and our personality. And I think it's absolutely essential.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, I think that's great advice. I think for this moment, it's why does our work matter in this moment and, you know, forever. So there may be organizations that do need to think about what's the way that we talk about what we're doing now that's different than the way that they were talking about their work 3 months ago. And that matters, and making sure that the way that board members understand the work that their organization is doing feels very relevant and rooted in this moment and its work on an ongoing basis.
I think that answer leads me to this next question, which is kind of a different conversation from just being ambassadors. But this person has a question about BoardSource and how is BoardSource positioning our fundraising as we aren't direct service providers in human services or health? How are we changing our ask? Are we changing our ask in any way? And that's a question we've gotten from a ton of nonprofits who are just interested in how they communicate with their traditional funders when this might not seem like a time where they feel as important as other organizations and communities.
That's a tough question to answer in the general, because I do think that there are, just different realities for different organizations depending on who you are, what you do, where you do it, who your funders and donors are, what that looks like for you in terms of business model and revenue streams. For us, this is a moment where we're really working hard to make sure that our current funding partners really understand what this moment means for us, what we're working to do for all of you, and why their support matters. I think that if you were going to try and apply that to another organization, for some organizations, this is a moment where securing new support might feel less likely, and that it's really about engaging deeply with current partners so that they understand what this moment means to you, and that you're inviting them to step up in different ways. We've had conversations with some of our funders who have been project support funders about would they be willing to consider converting support into general operating support. And there's some movement in the philanthropic field of funders that are acknowledging what a difference that can make. Helping our funders understand why and how our work is continuing, and why it matters to all of you. I guess what I would add to that, though, is this is not a moment, at least in my opinion, to say our work is more important than so-and-so's work. There is so much need, and there is enough need to go around. And so, really thinking about how do we do what we do, why does it matter, and who can support us in that, rather than positioning ourselves as the solution instead of someone else, because we just know that's not true. We need everyone.
Thanks, Ann. This is a question we've gotten several times on through our comment section here, and a lot of people are liking this question, which makes me think that a lot of folks want to hear more about it. But best practices around use of reserves at a time of crisis. How is the board involved in this decision making? So, Kathy, we'll throw that to you first, I think.
So I believe that our job as a board is to listen to our CEO. Hopefully you have a reserve philosophy, and you have a strong finance committee that has had input into how it thinks about and how the organization thinks about reserves. And then you listen to your CEO and you take your cues from her, and to talk about those reserves and how they can best be utilized. And I know there's oftentimes there's financial expertise on the board. I still think, again, I go back to what Ann said, and I actually wrote that down. This is not a time to say, here's how I would handle this, and let's act. So if the CEO is saying, look, there's some financial experts on here, but I go back to that we should have a reserve philosophy and how we think about reserves. And hopefully you've got that in place. If you don't have that, then that's a different kind of conversation at the board level. But again, we take our cues from the CEO. So Ann, what would you like to add?
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I guess I would add a couple of thoughts. One is reserves are for crises. This is not an inappropriate moment, in my opinion, to think about using reserves. That said, it's not just about the moment, it's about ensuring that the organization gets through the moment and comes out on the other side. And in a crisis like this one, where it's so hard to understand how long is this moment, how deeply will it impact us as an organization, there needs to be thought about what can it actually get us to, what does that path look like, and that is obviously informed by how much you have in terms of reserves and what your run rate looks like in terms of that revenue to expense ratio. So you can't simply say reserves will solve this problem, that's why we have reserves. You need to think about, in my opinion, using reserves as a bridging strategy to help you get somewhere. And if you don't have enough reserves to do that in the way that you are currently, you need to think about how that is a complementary strategy to other things.
Awesome. A question that we've gotten a ton is around virtual meetings. And Kathy, as a board chair, how do you ensure that a board that has traditionally only met in person can meet effective virtually? And what are some of your best kind of virtual meeting tips? And I will say before Kathy answers, Kathy wrote a great blog post for us on this very topic that we're going to be posting later today. But for some reason, if you need great information right now or just kind of the highlights of that piece, I think Kathy is going to share.
Thanks, Andy. And Andy wrote a great piece, which is more of a longer booklet that's already available to everyone on the BoardSource website. Yeah, I wrote this piece yesterday, given all the calls that have been coming in and all the requests for, oh my gosh, our board is not prepared to have a virtual meeting. They're kind of floundering and stumbling around. So quickly, I won't read you the entire, it's a short piece, but ideally, everyone needs to be able to see everyone on the screen. So I think it's really challenging to have a meeting where some people are calling in and some people you can see their face. So this gets to helping make sure your board understands the technology. So we could even use today as an example. We got on this half an hour early to make sure that all the technology was working. You should do that with your board. So in the anticipation of your first virtual meeting, if you haven't had one yet, make sure that people come on early to work through all of those things. So that's just on the technical side of things. On the setting the agenda, and Ann and I had to just convert a meeting that was supposed to be face-to-face in March into a much shorter 2-hour virtual meeting. And so the idea there is to be very, very clear. Now, I think this is a best strategy. You should use this all the time, but ensure that you as the board chair knows exactly what your CEO needs from the board and that you're expressing to her what you think the board needs from her in this moment, and keep your agenda tight. So set those goals. This is absolutely what we need, and I'm talking right now, but I think for all virtual meetings, because you can't go on as long as you can virtually when as opposed to face-to-face. So really tight attention to that agenda and the absolute needs of the organization at the time. I think for the board chair, when you're facilitating a virtual meeting, it's very different, obviously, because you don't have that energy that you have with everybody in the room. So you need to be very aware. Again, it helps to see everybody's face, but be aware of being sure you're inclusive and that you're inviting people into the dialogue at appropriate moments, and that you're also, I think it helps, and I talk about this in this short piece, establish some ground rules up front with the board and just say, look, this is different. I may be more, I may cut people off a little bit more, but let people know that time is really condensed in a virtual meeting and the impact that it has on the dynamics. You'll try to get to everyone. You really want to make sure that people don't repeat themselves and they don't repeat something that somebody else said and they don't go off on a tangent. It's just, those are the kind of ground rules I mean. So those are just some initial thoughts that I had on that.
Yeah, I think.
And Kathy did an amazing job doing all of those things at our meeting last week. So thanks for walking the walk, walking the talk.
Yeah.
Thank you for condensing that meeting into a much shorter meeting. So.
Emily Davis kind of gave a couple of good recommendations here in the comments too. She would recommend a Zoom tutorial, resources on good facilitation techniques. There's a lot to know and practice. Her favorites are the Facilitator's Guide to Participatory Decision Making and Roberta's Rules of Order. And I would just echo, and Kathy's a fabulous facilitator. This is where your facilitator really needs to step up and be a strong facilitator and kind of take control of the meeting. And I also would want to echo, I want everybody on the call as well. So the person who says, well, I just got out of the shower, I don't want to be on the call, set those expectations up early. We're expecting you to be on the call. It also really is a great tool for the facilitator to be able to see who is engaged, to be able to check body language and that sort of stuff. So everybody, I would encourage folks to stay on the call.
Absolutely essential. And one quick thing on that, Andy, and that is there's a difference between a meeting where you're actually making a decision as opposed to you're talking about some things. And so I think that's an important distinction, and look forward to looking at that recommendation around participatory decision making virtually, because it is different than decision making face to face.
This is kind of on the same topic, but this is for you, Ann, and this is kind of more of around a staff question. So this is not as much of a board question, but as we've shifted to a work from home mode at our office, just like everybody else in the country is doing, um, how do you work on keeping the staff engaged and ensure that they're paying attention to the right things during this time and not kind of just going about their work as business as usual? How do you make sure that they're staying engaged and paying attention to the right things right now?
Yeah, so this is definitely not my expertise. So I'm speaking here more as, a fellow CEO or executive about things that we've been thinking about. And it's not completely dissimilar from what Kathy shared about board meetings. I think the connection matters. And being really intentional about how are we going to come together both formally and informally as a single team or a whole team. How are we going to come together in small groups or teams within teams to make sure that we are operating as one organization, one team, instead of as, for us, 22 different islands. It's really easy and can happen really quickly that organizations and individuals within organizations get isolated. There's lots of great advice about how to avoid that, whether you're looking specifically at, virtual office guidance or managing remote employees. I think there's lots of great expertise, and I know we have some of that that we've been making available through the Ask an Expert service, and we had a great blog entry that came out yesterday from an expert in Teams and HR sharing some advice there. But I think being really intentional and not assuming that it's going to happen on its own, probably coming together more often than you normally would, including informal opportunities to build team. A lot of our team members are literally alone in their workplaces right now, and that means that work is community, and we need to ramp up our thoughtfulness and intentionality around that as leaders, and think about our team members both as employees and humans in this moment who may just need us differently.
I'm going to highlight somebody's question here because I know that this is difficult, and I want to make sure that we're not leaving folks out who don't have the same capabilities. But Amy commented that she lives in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan and wants to know how they can involve everyone. Those that have low bandwidth, some in their area still have dial-up, and I know that this is a really tough situation. And believe me, we want to help you fight through this. I think that leads me to jumping down to another comment from Julia Wilson, who is on our board of directors, who I'm not sure if Julia, you were responding to Amy's question or not, but I think that this is a great response. And you said, if you have some people on video and some who are only on the phone, we set up a member who was on the video to be the phone only monitor. It's a specific role, and they're responsible for jumping into the narrative to narrate the visual info, the slides, the graphs, or other, and reminding the group which pieces might be as readily absorbed by folks who are on the phone only. So if you have people who can't get on a Zoom call, I think that those are some great tips from Julia there. Also, being able to follow up with folks on the phone, by phone after the meeting, just to make sure that they got the necessary info, that sort of thing. Kathy, do you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, just a couple, and thank you for that, Julia. Hi. One of them was, I didn't mention, is if you're going to use PowerPoints or those kinds of presentations or readings, make sure everybody has it well in advance because they might not be able to see a screen, for example. And also, even if they can see a screen, don't put the PowerPoint up there because we need to be able to see each other. And then another thought that I had as you were talking is that make sure that whether you're on video or just on the phone, that when you start to speak, in a virtual environment, you say who this is. And Julia, you're great at this because Julia will say, this is Julia. But that's for everybody. So even if, like I said, even if you're on video, but especially if you're just on phone, be sure to say, this is Kathy. So thank you.
I would just add, and this is more.
Oh, we might have.
As well.
She's back.
Okay, you're back. So you might want to repeat the beginning of your answer there.
Oh, I was going to say, sorry, I may have my own internet connectivity issues in this moment. This may be more relevant to staffs, but there certainly could be some application to boards as well. Thinking about how technology can be used differently in this moment. So, as an example, the board source team, we were not across the organization using Slack. We were using it only within certain teams. We've started using it. It seems like it's helpful. Trying things and asking for feedback. What's working? What's not? This is a good moment to get a lot of feedback loops about things that maybe could be tried, should be tried, have been tried and are working and we should do more of, or have been tried and aren't working so well. I think people appreciate just knowing that we're working at it and that we're trying, and that we are really open to what's working and not working for them. I think that means a lot in a moment like this.
We talked a little bit about earlier, and by the way, we're 45 minutes in here, and I had told Ann and Kathy that we probably were going to last about 45 minutes. Are you okay with taking a couple more questions, or if you have more meetings, we can wrap this up? Okay, so we talked a little bit earlier about how we can keep boards from micromanaging, but Kate has a question about what are the top tasks we can mobilize our board to do that will help decrease stress on the already overloaded staff. And her thoughts here were fundraising calls or mailings. Do you have any other thoughts where board members might be able to actually jump in and participate in a staff role?
I guess my head goes to the sort of advisor roles, less than the staff roles, which I already spoke about. I suspect that there are ways that, depending on the organization, there are things that board members could take on as bodies of work. I think the thing to watch out for there is just making sure that the board understands that you're asking for that in a specific moment for a specific reason, and that they're operating as a volunteer, rather than blurring the lines and sort of creating the expectation or the false understanding of that as a board role, because that can just create a lot of challenges both in the moment and down the line. Kathy, what would you add?
I very much agree, and I would just add the one of the big issues I see with that is that how do you lift the board back out or individuals back out after the crisis is over? I've seen that that's sometimes an issue. So that's all I have to add.
Yeah, I think intentionality here is the key. So if you have something, it's a specific ask that it is time limited, and they understand what the ask actually is. I think is great. Just a couple of people have asked this, and this is not really relevant to boards, but I do just want to say, so we are broadcasting this through Zoom, and what happens is Facebook has a plugin that you can use your Zoom app to broadcast. So several folks had asked, how are we doing this right now? This is through Zoom, but Facebook has an app where you can just broadcast your live Zoom feed by just sharing your screen. So that's how we did that. Okay, let's move on. Actually, what I want to do right now is I would just love to hear personal questions for both of you. How are you taking care of yourself right now, physically, spiritually, mentally during this time? And is there something good you're reading? Is there something good you're watching or listening to that is helping you kind of stay energized? And do you have any kind of recommendations for the other nonprofit leaders out there on what they might be able to do?
Kathy, do you want to go first?
Well, sure, and I would just say, I'm not going to tell you all the things that I'm binge watching, but so what do? I write blogs about governance. I'm such a geek. That's what excites me in these moments. But I do want to take this moment to say that I feel it's really important, as my role as chair is to make sure that Ann is taking care of herself. And Ann and I have a weekly call. We sometimes can't make it, but we try to make all of those. And we have an hour set aside where we talk. And in these instances, and I can say this week, that's where I go first is, Ann, how are you doing? And how's the staff? And that's where I think, and not to go deeply, don't want her to, she can talk to me about whatever she wants to talk about. And so it's wonderful to have that kind of relationship. And that's a board concern as well, is we just want to make sure our CEO can be as resilient as possible in these times, because we can only imagine the demands that are being made on you. And as the leader of a staff, and it's great to have people like you, Andy, and your colleagues, and that's where my mind goes right to her. So, and all of you, thanks. Ann?
Well, one, thanks for that. It means a lot and it is incredibly helpful. And I would encourage CEOs and EDs that are on the line, you know, if you're not doing that, or if that hasn't been a part of your relationship with your chair, try and think about, you know, incremental ways that you can move in that direction, because it really does make a difference to be able to have that space, that trust, that understanding of, you know, just where you are as a person and a leader. So for me personally, those who know me well know that I am an off the charts extrovert. So this is hard for me. You know, just, you know, sort of losing the human connection of being in the world and being with the team. So I've been spending a lot of time virtually with friends and family, in addition to all that we've been doing as a staff team to stay connected to each other. And for me, that's been really, really helpful, really, really positive, and actually has some nice surprises for me. I've been much more connected to people in my life who don't live in the same place as I do than I normally am. And so that's a little silver lining from one extrovert to another.
Yeah, I do want to lift up a comment here about this. And Abby commented they have virtual water coolers or brown bags. This is for their staff, a happy hour and morning coffees plus their weekly staff meeting. Each day offers a non-work virtual way to connect with their teams. They have 16 people in 2 different cities who are all working from home now. And we've been doing this at the office ourselves. We've been trying to have virtual happy hours or virtual coffee breaks together, just a way to connect. And I know that it's different, especially for folks who don't have a partner or a spouse at home, or may be younger and have never lived alone and don't have access to their friends. So make sure that you're reaching out and supporting those folks that are on your staff who just to make sure that they're doing okay. It's a weird and difficult and different time for us all. And you know, maybe you can talk about binging Tiger King on Netflix. It is certainly my current obsession. I'm okay with telling folks that, and I listen to Yacht Rock Radio when I'm doing work during the day. So those are just the ways that I'm trying to keep sane. And I want to read Jeremy's comment here. It seems like one of the best things here is that we can practice self-care by reaching out to others to check on them, which can remind us of what to do for ourselves as well. We're all in this together. So Jeremy, thank you so much. And I think that's a really good place to kind of wrap this session up. And I think it worked pretty well. At one point we had about 200 folks on, but we stayed with a lot of folks and a lot of engagement, a lot of interaction. We really appreciate all of your questions. A week from today, since this one went pretty well, we're going to have Gene Takagi on. He is going to discuss, we're going to have more of a legal bent to our conversation. He is a lawyer from California, also on the BoardSource board as of just recently. So we're excited to have him on next week. And obviously, Gene is not your lawyer. He is not going to be able to give extremely specific advice, but he can give us some kind of talking points and places that we can look to and give us great advice around things we should be thinking. So if you had kind of a more specific legal question, bring that back to us next week. Or, like I said earlier, feel free to email us, my team at the Ask the Expert team. We're still posting those to our Facebook page every day, or ones that we're seeing a lot of energy around. And also trying to keep that page updated with any resources that you might need. So this was fun for me. It was a break from the norm. We're going to start doing these more and more. I'm just going to go ahead and tell Kathy and Ann right now, even though they don't know it. I think that there's enough information here that we can do this again soon. So be on the lookout. We'll let you know when our next session will be. But I am telling you right now, it will be next Wednesday at noon with Gene Takagi, and we may alter the schedule after that. But we want you all to come back, all to ask questions, and I had a great time. Ann or Kathy, any closing notes here?
Just want to thank you both, and to all of you who are on with us, and to BoardSource for the work that we do. Thanks.
Yes, ditto. Thank you all for being with us. Thanks for the trust and confidence that you put in BoardSource. We hope we're earning it. Please let us know how we can continue to help you.
Thank you, everybody. We'll talk
Thank you.
soon.